All right, let's talk about one of the strangest, most unbelievable, and frankly hilarious conflicts in all of military history. We're going back to 1932. The Australian Army, packing machine guns, decides to declare war on a massive flock of birds. And, spoiler alert, the Army is about to lose. Badly.
You know, when you think of the great wars of history, your mind probably goes to stuff like Rome battling Carthage, or the Allies fighting the Axis, these huge world-shaping conflicts. But on that same list of historical wars, you have to add another one, Australia versus emus. And no, that is not a joke. This actually happened, and it's a story you are not going to forget.
So how in the world does a country end up at war with its wildlife? Well, you have to picture Western Australia right after World War I. The Great Depression is in full swing, and the government has this idea to settle veterans on new farmland out in the remote wheat belt. It was supposed to be a fresh start, but turns out they weren't the only ones moving into the area.
20,000. That's the estimated number of emus that, right on cue after their breeding season, decided to migrate straight into these brand new farmlands. For the emus, it was a paradise. For the farmers, it was an absolute invasion.
I mean, for the emus, these wheat farms were just a giant all-you-can-eat buffet. They were munching on crops, sure, but the real disaster was the damage they caused. They just crash right through fences, which then let in other pests like rabbits. For these farmers who are already struggling, watching their work get literally eaten and trampled, well, they were getting desperate.
And you have to understand, they weren't just up against some dumb bird. The emu is a surprisingly tough adversary. First off, they can run up to 50 kilometers an hour. Their bodies, with all those thick feathers and fat, act like a kind of natural body armor. But the most frustrating part? They use what you can only call guerrilla tactics, breaking off into small, chaotic groups that are impossible to predict.
So, faced with this feathered army, the farmers, a lot of them ex-soldiers themselves, did the only thing they could think of. They asked for military backup. And, kind of shockingly, the Minister of Defense, Sir George Pierce, said yes. He actually authorized a military operation.
And this just shows you the level of confidence they had. The plan seemed pretty simple, right? Send out Major Meredith with a couple of soldiers, give him 2 powerful Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammo, engage the emu, win. What could possibly go wrong? On paper, those birds were toast.
So for their first move, the soldiers went with a classic military strategy, the ambush. They spotted a group of about 50 emus, got the machine gun set up, and just waited for the birds to get into the perfect kill zone. But the second the guns opened up, the emus did something genius. Even if they didn't know it, they just scattered. Instantly, in every single direction. It was chaos. And trying to hit these erratic, fast-moving targets with a weapon designed for concentrated fire, it was useless. They blasted through thousands of bullets and barely hit anything. Round 1 to the emus.
Okay, so the ambush was a total failure. Major Meredith decides they need to get mobile. What's the new plan? Let's mount one of the machine guns on a truck and literally chase the birds down. You know, fight speed with speed.
This plan went even worse, if you can believe it. The truck couldn't keep up with the emus, and the ride was so bumpy you couldn't aim to save your life. And then, and this is the best part, an emu literally ran into the truck, hit the steering wheel, and caused the driver to swerve off the road and crash into a fence. You can't make this stuff up.
After about a week of these kinds of disasters, with the newspapers just having an absolute field day and mocking the whole thing, the operation was officially shut down. The soldiers were called back, the Great Emu War was over, and the military had been totally outsmarted by a bunch of birds.
So let's just look at the final numbers, because they are just staggering. The official report said they fired 9,860 rounds of ammunition to get just 986 confirmed kills. That is an average of exactly 10 bullets for every single emu. It was an incredibly inefficient operation.
There's this famous quote from an ornithologist who was watching the whole thing, and it just sums it all up perfectly. He said, "If we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world." He was talking about their shocking resilience, how they could seemingly take a bullet and just keep on running.
So the army goes home, completely defeated, but the emus are still there, right? The farmers' problem isn't solved.
What happens next is actually the real lesson in this whole weird story.
Well, once the army left, they switched to a much simpler solution, a bounty system. The government just started offering money for dead emus and gave ammunition directly to the farmers. And guess what? The farmers, the people who actually knew the land and how the emus behaved, were way more successful. Problem managed.
And so the Great Emu War just became this legendary story. It's now this beloved part of Australian folklore. It's basically a real-life comedy about why you should never, ever underestimate your opponent, and it's just a fantastic lesson in national humility.
Ultimately, this whole thing wasn't won with military might. It was solved with local knowledge and a bit of common sense. And it leaves you with this great question. What really happens when you throw all your brute force at an enemy who just doesn't play by your rules? Well, back in 1932, the emus gave Australia a very clear and very funny answer.